I suppose my role is kind of a hedgehog champion, which is a voluntary capability. It's sort of it's a bit of a role in itself. But I founded the Be Hedgehog Aware organization when I was 13. So I discovered hedgehogs in my garden. I can tell you about the full story throughout the presentation, and was obviously fascinated by discovering hedgehogs, but learned a lot about their decline in particular. They have declined significantly, as I'm sure many of you are aware, as a species across the UK. So HedgehogAware was my way of taking action and doing something to spread the word about hedgehogs and what we can do to help them survive and thrive. It's okay. I'm from Be Hedgehog Aware. I'm also representing the Prickly Patch, which is a new wild hedgehog rehabilitation centre in the Wye Valley area, which is opening very soon and is our latest project to support hedgehogs in that region. But my awareness campaign has very much been focused across the whole of the country, doing lots of exciting activities and engagement, which I'll tell you more about. But first of all, what I really like to do is to talk to you a bit about hedgehogs as a species. I don't know how many of you have seen hedgehogs before, maybe something you could kind of think about or put in the chat, maybe if you have. But the species of hedgehog we have in the UK, if you can see the slide is hopefully updated, is the West European hedgehog, the Erinaceus europaeus. It's one of about 17 hedgehog species worldwide, so you might have seen different ones online, like the pygmy hedgehog in Africa and Asia. They're quite white and fluffy. They're often kept as pets. Whereas the Erinaceus europaeus in the UK is a nocturnal spiny mammal. It's a wild animal, and it hibernates between sort of September and February, but it depends on the time of year and the temperature, because we've been experiencing quite significant fluctuations in the hibernation schedule where the nights have been warmer and hedgehogs are actually coming out during hibernation, sort of taking pauses, particularly to look for water sources. So that's something to bear in mind in terms of we see a change in climate. But this is the Erinaceus europaeus, which is a great overview of the hedgehog. They are very, very popular animals. They've had a support for a long time. There's a lovely model hedgehog here, which was found from ancient Egyptian tomb. I'm sure many of you remember and heard of Mrs. Tiggywinkle. And certainly, I think nowadays there's a lot more cards and gifts, which are really cute with hedgehogs on, sort of a gift card or things like that. If you're giving someone a greetings card, I think they're very popular. It might just be the case that everyone's giving me the hedgehog themed cards and presents, given my love for them. So either of those explanations is acceptable. They were also once voted Britain's favourite mammal as well. So there's a lot to love about our hedgehogs. They are really kind of symbolic of UK wildlife. And I think that also helps us reflect a lot on why we should put time and effort into their conservation and protection, which will in turn benefit wider biodiversity as well. Coming on to the theme of hedgehogs and their general life, does anyone know what foods hedgehogs eat as a natural diet? It's easier to do this in like an in-person talk than online, but if anyone wants to put really quickly in the chat, I'll have a look. But if not, just have a think in your mind what they might eat as a natural diet out in the wild.
Bugs and beetles.
Answers bugs and beetles. Yeah, that's definitely pretty spot on. I think that's the answer I tend to get. I sometimes get people shouting out kind of slugs and snails as well is quite a popular one. In response to the question, Ant was pretty spot on in terms of bugs and beetles. So it's mostly ground-dwelling invertebrates, things like caterpillars, millipedes, earwigs, and beetles that are their main diet. They will eat slugs and snails, but not unless they're desperate, because they can obviously be agents for parasitic conditions and things like lungworm and ringworm when consumed in excess. So that's why they make an appearance lower down on that chart. So there are some interesting sort of anomalies on there, which I'm happy to explain in more detail in the questions section. But the main takeaway here is creepy crawlies, so beetles, caterpillars, and insects. If you want to supplement their natural diet, the best way to do this is with a meaty cattle dog food. You can also use kitten biscuits, which are really good. They're quite affordable, and hedgehogs seem to love them. They're good for the hoglets, well, and not so much hoglets, but the juveniles. So when they kind of grow up after being a baby hedgehog, they're also good for those in terms of their nutrition development. Don't feed hedgehogs bread and milk is something I would say as well. This is something which has been around as sort of a myth. Sort of a few decades ago, it was quite popular, but I think most people understand now that we shouldn't feed hedgehogs bread and milk. They are lactose intolerant after all, so that's obviously not a good step. In terms of hedgehog behavior, we mentioned and we know that they're nocturnal creatures, but they are generally very solitary. Something like this would be quite a rare occurrence. They often mostly come together when there's a food source or during the breeding season when they're looking for mates. So they are, yeah, rarely aggressive, but will be known to compete, particularly at the moment. We're finding a lot more food sources are scarce because of habitat loss, habitat change, and fragmentation. So anywhere that if you're feeding hedgehogs in your garden can become a really valuable source of food. They are very reliant on their sense of smell. You'll often see them snuffling along the garden, perhaps your patio, looking at the in between the cracks in a patio in order to find beetles and insects. That's because their eyesight is very poor. So as hoglets, baby hedgehogs, they're born blind and their eyesight only develops gradually over time. So they are left to be very reliant on their sense of smell and often noisy with a range of different sounds. We might get to see some of that when we play some footage a bit later. In terms of the hedgehog year, if we look at this as a calendar, we are well within the main active period now. We've exceeded the temperature threshold of 5 degrees for 5 consecutive nights. That's well been exceeded above that at the moment following hibernation, which means that hedgehogs are pretty active. They're out and about and they're looking towards the mating season. So the hoglet baby hedgehog season will commence anywhere kind of late April, early May, and then the young will come out of their nest fairly early on in the summer. The main two busy periods within this calendar year for hedgehog rescue, when hedgehogs need that little bit extra support, is the run up to the autumn season in the winter. So that's where you get autumn juveniles, sort of around September and October, that are born quite late and don't necessarily have the time available to put on enough weight before hibernation. So they require support from a rescue centre. Or the summer period where there can be issues such as dehydration for hedgehogs, particularly in these warmer summers we've been seeing the last couple of years. That's been really challenging for hedgehogs in particular in different environments where they haven't got that water and they often get dehydrated and then have got nowhere to take shelter. So just bear that in mind in terms of hedgehog rescue, which is another key aspect of my work. Ooh. On the topic of hoglets, here's a very cute photo of mum and baby hedgehog hoglet. The average litter size is about 4 to 5. We had about 3 or 4 in our four, I think it was in our last litter in the garden where I lived in the Wye Valley. So that was great and so lovely to be able to see them on our wildlife cameras. I mentioned about them being born blind, but they are very, very small when they're born. They're pink, they have very few spines or quills, but they develop over time. So by the time a hedgehog reaches adulthood and full maturity, it has anywhere between 6 and 8,000 of their quills and spines. They're made of keratin, so the same material as your fingernails and hair. So they're pretty robust actually. They leave the nest after about 4 weeks and they really have full independence from about 8 weeks. So it reinforces that solitary nature of them as a species, the fact that they're only accompanied on foraging trips for maximum of 8 weeks, really. And then they're out for their own to fend for look for food, for water, and a place to live, suitable habitat. So that's something to bear in mind in terms of themselves as a species and the support that they really value of having a reliable source of food, water, or a habitat in a wild garden. On the topic of habitat, nesting is something I'd really like to cover in detail. So we'll go through a few slides on nesting, and they'll be broadly based around the 3 key types of nests you'll see here, which do require generally leaves and structural support from things like twigs. But the first type of nest is a daytime nest. It's often a very flimsy structure. I think the best way of describing it is a mound of leaves and twigs. And it's the way I discovered hedgehogs. I sat out in the garden during the lockdown in the pandemic, the first lockdown in 2020. And there was this mound of leaves and twigs behind me in the garden. and it turned out to be moving, and it's like some sort of snoring sounds coming from it. Later that evening, it was hedgehogs scurrying across the patio. So I was obviously thrilled to see that they had made a lovely little habitat nesting spot in a wild patch of our garden that was a bit overgrown with some brambles and leaves. Do keep an eye out for these sort of structures in your garden or in forest land or even in public parks, for example. Often as we approach the season of warmer weather, they often opt for more casual nesting that's lighter, a bit like this. That can make them vulnerable to strimmers, as it says here on the slide. And that's something I'd like to address later on with the Be Hedgehog Aware campaign and how we've taken measures as best as we can to minimize strimmer injuries. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got the hibernacular, the hibernation nest. This is a much more structured type of nest whereby the hedgehog will gather thorny materials from the undergrowth, leaves and twigs, and shape it into their own shape, basically. So they'll curl into a ball, as you know, when they sleep and are sleeping or in natural defense mechanism, they'll be curling into a ball. And that is how they'll sleep through the hibernation. So it's a much more structured affair, and it's often found in denser areas of woodland or garden, for example. So keep an eye out for those or the remnants of those as we come out of hibernation. How can you tell if you have hedgehogs in your garden is a question I obviously often get asked. And here's me in the garden doing some hedgehog feeding station maintenance and putting out the food and water most nights, which they got very used to as regular visitors to our garden. So the main things to look out for is, as I mentioned, that nest is a telltale sign. Leaves and twigs. Look out in the wild areas of your garden, but also keep in mind any paths of long grass, areas of long grass that could be trampled down by hedgehogs as they travel, particularly between neighboring gardens. Hedgehogs can travel anywhere between 2 and 3 kilometers every night. So having an easy access route between gardens, which is what we call a hedgehog highway, and that's something I'll mention on the next slide, is absolutely crucial for them. But do keep an eye out because those areas of long grass can be trampled down because of how far they travel. And on those little legs, they can go quite a long way. But if you have enough hedgehog traffic in and out of your garden, you'll often see the grass being trampled. You can also look out for hedgehog poo. It's long, dark, looks a bit like a kind of brown, dark slug. There's some photos of it online and on my website as well, if you want to spot that in more detail, what that might look like as well. So I mentioned hedgehog highways. These are basically just gaps in fences which enable hedgehogs to get through. They're 13 centimeters or so in diameter. So get a CD case is the best way of thinking of it. If you want to make a hedgehog highway, I'd say have a CD case and pop it up and cut a hole in your fence that's about that diameter, or ensure that there's about that height underneath netting so that hedgehogs can travel between gardens. It's so important. There was this brilliant study done on the slide that I'm sharing now in a fairly semi-urban area. If I go to the next one, you can see here it's sort of parkland surrounded by houses and a body of water. But it found that they tracked a male and female hedgehog. There were so many different nesting sites and hives of activity every night. And the male hedgehog averaged 1.8 kilometers per night and the female 1.1 kilometers. So really important, highlighting how hedgehog highways can facilitate that movement of hedgehogs between gardens to find food, to find water, and also to find a suitable habitat spot as well. So definitely encourage, do it at home is something you can do, and encourage your neighbours as well to make whole streets of joined up hedgehog highways. You can get signage like this, which is really fancy. I don't think the hedgehogs mind too much, but you can definitely get a nice sign if you want to put it on and show people what you're doing. But as I say, 13 centimeter gap in the fence or underneath netting is really important, can make a big difference to hedgehogs and their outcomes in a particular neighborhood. There we go. It's time for some hedgehog footage. I hope this is going to share okay. Let me have a look. It might be something I'll have to open a new tab for. So hopefully I'm just going to switch over between the two windows. Can everyone see sort of a media player?
Yeah,
Yeah,
looks like it.
that looks good. It might be a bit buffery because it's going over the internet, but have a look. I'll play you a few minutes of this. It's a few different clips of footage from my garden over the years. So this was the first type of feeding station we made. It was very simple. It was an upside down plastic crate with a 13 centimeter hole cut in it, duct tape to make sure there weren't any sharp edges left. And it was great for putting water in, provided a kind of sheltered place for the hedgehogs to feed. So that the water bowl was placed outside, which is why the hedgehog kind of stopped there to rest. So it's a really simple solution if you want to provide a feeding station for hedgehogs. There are other different types. You can buy them online from kind of recycled wood material and recycled plastic. There's a great company called Riverside Woodcraft who do those. Or you can do a DIY hedgehog house. If you go to the Hedgehog Street website, there's instructions to download and make your own. So as I mentioned, these are really simple to make feeding stations, but there is sort of one major caveat to them, which is hopefully we've seen in the next slide. Here we go. Oh. Cats.
A giant cat.
It's my cat as well, so full responsibility. Yeah, so the cats can get in because of the nature of the design, but if you get a hedgehog feeding station that's got sort of a tunnel and a maze, they have to go around a sort of S-shaped bend to get in. Hedgehogs don't mind. Obviously, they can do that. The cats can't. These are two hedgehogs. This is a sort of mating nest ritual, which they do during the hoglet season. And these are presumed to be two male hedgehogs. This. Yes, probably competing over the food there. And then this is the sort of verge of long grass, which would get trampled down in our garden to get into the neighbour's garden, whereby you can see where the hedgehogs were using it as a sort of highway. So that's the kind of area to look out for if you've got that. This was the other type of feeding station as well, you could see. And this was Ivan, one of the hedgehogs we rewilded. So obviously part of our role is hedgehog rescue and working with local rescue centres and now our own rescue centre, the Prickly Patch, around the Wye Valley area to rehabilitate hedgehogs that are poorly injured or perhaps been orphaned as well. So in this instance, Ivan was suffering with quite a heavy parasitic burden, and after a couple of months of treatment, managed to be released back into a garden with a healthy weight, clear from heavy parasitic load, and therefore was kind of able to be reintegrated back into the wild, which is one of the most rewarding things to do following hedgehog rescue. And it's always great when we can do that whenever possible. On the topic of hedgehog rescue, just briefly, a couple of photos from sort of rescue situations, which can vary in complexity from hedgehogs being trapped in netting, injuries from machinery, most commonly things about dehydration, hedgehogs getting stuck in fences, and internal parasitic burdens being an issue as well, perhaps due to food shortage or consumption of slugs and snails in excess. So obviously not all the hedgehogs will make it. Some of them are very poorly, but the volunteer rescue centres do what they can. They do a brilliant job with very limited sort of external support in the way of finances and particularly on the financial side of things. But they do a great job, and it's very rewarding to be able to work with them and now have our own centre. There we go. That brings us to the end of the footage. I'm going to switch back to slides. Hopefully that comes back with a slide that says hedgehog footage on. Yep.
It does.
Brilliant. So unfortunately, this is also the sad bit of the talk where we address the decline in hedgehog numbers. We've gone from around 30 million hedgehogs in the 1950s in the UK to less than 1 million today. So a really sharp decline in actually quite a short period of time. You know, we're talking, it's not that long ago, and think about for such a steep decline in the population of one species. Hedgehogs are particularly now struggling in rural areas where they once used to thrive. So this is due to a variety of factors, which we'll look at in more detail in a moment. But the general consensus on the State of Britain's Hedgehogs Report, which is published by Hedgehog Street, the national conservation charity, every year, is of a widespread decline across the UK. I've got some more specific data for South East Wales, which is where I lived for a long time and did work with conservation efforts there. But the main takeaway from the latest report, which was a few years ago now, is that in urban areas and semi-urban areas, particularly towns, the picture is that there's a more stable population. So that decline isn't as steep, and there's the genuine likelihood that we can turn the curve around the other way and see a positive growth in the number of hedgehogs. Whereas in the countryside, that decline is still continuing. While where hedgehogs once thrived, they are now pretty scarce, unfortunately. So this is due to a variety of factors. And I leave this slide on for a minute for you to kind of read or take a photo of. We'll go through these in more detail. But it's an overlap between natural and anthropogenic threats. So a lot of it is more on the human side of things over the past decades that's attributable to hedgehog decline. But certainly there's a bit of an overlap between the two, and they do apply to both urban and rural landscapes. So to pick out a few key highlights from there, I think roads is a key one. So we know, unfortunately, from studies that hundreds of thousands of hedgehogs are killed annually on roads. So a huge number of the population, we think about it in that context of how many are remaining in the UK. So obviously this is a major threat to hedgehogs, and the way in which roads can fragment habitat and create a barrier. You know, hedgehogs are forced to cross roads to access what was previously a well-known, well-established habitat, for example. Entanglement, plastic, netting, litter, hedgehogs certainly are by no means immune to this problem, like all wildlife. And bonfires. I mean, I do this presentation all year round to different groups, and I've just got into the habit of leaving this on from November onwards, just to remind people, because when bonfire season comes round, it's important, if possible, not to build your bonfires in advance. They look like a perfect nesting site for hedgehogs. And if possible, if you need to do that for any reason, then perhaps try on the day to make sure that you've checked carefully and been back through, maybe deconstructed or reconstructed the bonfire to ensure that hedgehogs and indeed any other wildlife, toads, slow worms, etc., aren't nesting in there. Machinery, hedgehogs have no kind of fight or flight reflex, so their natural defense to a threat like a strimmer is to curl up in a ball. And that makes them extremely vulnerable to strimmer injuries as they nest all year round in these sort of sites where strimmers and lawnmowers are so frequently used. So I do a lot of work with organizations and big users of strimmers and lawnmowers, as well as the manufacturers, to try and mitigate this issue, because it's been becoming a large problem, a large number of admissions, particularly in the spring and the summer months as people look to tidy up their garden and hedgerows. It's a problem, and we're seeing lots more admissions with strimmer injuries, which often have not negative outcomes for the hedgehogs, in that they often don't make it through treatment because of the severity of injuries in the rescue centre. Did we know hedgehogs can swim on the bottom point? They can swim, they just need help getting out. So if you've got a pond in your garden, make sure you've got a ramp of some kind. It could be a chunk of wood or some stones, just so that if a hedgehog does decide to go for a swim, it's able to get back out again. We've got two threats here which are more in detail, but sort of wider land use change, existential changes, if you like, and threats to the landscape, both in a rural context and urban context. So in the rural environment, we've seen a lot more intensification of agriculture, intensive farming practices, removal of hedgerows, monocultures, and things like that. And although there's been a greater shift, particularly in many areas of the countryside, towards regenerative farming, we're still seeing the efforts and the implication of intensive farming from the past few decades playing out really for hedgehogs. It's particularly affecting the invertebrate populations. So what it means is the impacts on soil health, for example, and the loss of habitat and the loss of nutrients has having an impact on our invertebrates and beetles and caterpillars, which, coming back to the start of the presentation, is exactly what hedgehogs rely on as their core food source, as well as being at the base of the wider food chain in the ecosystem. So it's a real threat here that we're seeing. So any steps we can take towards rewilding land, regenerative farming practices, is going to have a net positive benefit for hedgehogs and other species. The simplification of the urban landscape is another issue. We're seeing a lot more paving over of gardens, prioritization of driveways, for example, people laying down artificial turf and grass. This all has an implication for habitat loss. And ultimately, even a small habitat like a park in a city area can have a really positive benefit for the biodiversity in that neighborhood. And ultimately, we need to make sure that our gardens are accessible and they're welcoming to hedgehogs. So they're not over tidied, they're not manicured, they're a bit wild in places. You don't have to let the whole of your garden grow wild, but having a wild corner can make a real difference. And as I mentioned, making sure that you've got that access rather than fences being put up. And that's something we're doing, working with home builders as part of our campaign to try and address that. Pesticide use, particularly non-selective pesticides and insecticides, are not good in terms of having obliterated, in many instances, the invertebrate population. And then predation. So this is definitely not by any means a factor that has driven the hedgehog decline over the past decades. Badgers and hedgehogs, for example, have coexisted for thousands of years. But badgers are the main predator of hedgehogs, if you're interested. Foxes can be too, but badgers are the main predator. There is, however, really good news, because I understand that can be a bit kind of downbeat, and that's how I felt when first learning about the decline in hedgehog numbers. But there are over 130,000 people registered as hedgehog champions on the Hedgehog Street website, which is where you can make a pledge to support hedgehogs, and you get access to brilliant resources to share with your friends, family, and neighbours, and do talks like this if you really want to as well. So there's lots to get involved with, and it's really positive. There's also a big hedgehog map online where you can go and log your sightings of hedgehogs, whether you see them in your garden, whether you've made a hedgehog highway, and also if you've seen a dead hedgehog, so on the side of the road, for example. That all makes a really valuable contribution to citizen science and research monitoring efforts. So I'd strongly encourage you to do that where possible. Hedgehog rescues as a direct intervention is something that I've been doing as well, which makes a real difference to the lives of those hedgehogs that are saved. This is a very cute example, but also quite a complex case we had of 4 baby hoglets. And you see there's actually 4 in that photo on the left in the nest. They were tiny, less than a week old. You can see by the number of spines, and they would just fit in the palm of your hand. And unfortunately, the nest had been disturbed on a farm by machinery. And what that meant was the mum had abandoned the nest, and we waited and waited, but the mum did not return. So the hedgehogs had to be brought to a rescue centre and looked after by hand. It's just like having a baby at a very early stage. You have to hand feed them during the night with sort of syringes and pipettes. It's very labour intensive. They can't have any solid food and things. So what that means was it's very challenging for their survival in an artificial environment. But I'm pleased to say that 3 of the 4 made it through this very intensive treatment. Here they are looking a bit older. They're older than this now. They've now been released as juvenile hedgehogs into a wild foster garden, a supported environment with food, water, and cameras to keep an eye on them. And they were called Dylan and Delilah. So one of them was called Dylan, which was quite fun. And we got Norman as well at the top. So the rescue centre were obviously very grateful for us having rescued them and looked after them the best we could in that interim time. The Be HedgehogAware campaign is the final section of my presentation this evening, but just wanted to talk to you a bit about what I've done as part of my sort of charitable organisation and cause to help improve the outcomes for hedgehogs across the UK. So the main thing, first of all, was to focus on strimmer and gardening related injuries. So I recognised that lawnmowers and strimmers were posing a significant threat to hedgehogs. And what we really needed was people just to check before you start work every time. Check for hedgehogs, longer areas of grass, overgrown parts of your garden. There might well be other wildlife there that you can save as well. So wouldn't it be good if we had stickers on lawnmowers and strimmers? So we didn't want them on the boxes because that's one of the things manufacturers were suggesting. We wanted them on the machinery itself. So people would see it every time rather than a box which you would throw away. So I reached out to all the big manufacturers and importers to the UK of equipment, and it took a lot of sort of persistence and emailing and getting things through. And finally, in 2022, we had our first breakthrough, our first partnership, which with Hyundai. So Hyundai Power Products and their UK importer agreed to have the Be HedgehogAware sticker on their lawnmowers and on their strimmers, which is such a brilliant breakthrough. So I'm thrilled to say that this is me with their managing director and their South Wales factory. Be HedgehogAware stickers are now on over 100,000 pieces of machinery which come off the production line every single year. So it's a really great breakthrough. There's quite large stickers as well. I've got smaller versions of these stickers which I give out to people at in-person talks and events. You can also order them online through the website. Hyundai were kind enough to provide me with 10,000 of the stickers for free. I've got through a lot of those now, but I'm still offering stickers for free to anyone who wants them for your own machinery, or if you're an organization, a group, a local authority who's interested, we can help you there as well. There's a small charge for P&P if you order online, but otherwise they are free stickers. So that was a brilliant breakthrough, and it had a great snowball effect in that other manufacturers came on as well. So Stiga, a multinational manufacturer, we worked with them to create a sort of yellow, an orangey yellow and black branded sticker, which kept in tune with their brand, and they've got it on their equipment too. And some local firms, as you can see pictured on the slides as well. I've also been working with Jewson, the builders merchants, and their parent company to deliver a really interesting project on hedgehog-friendly fencing, which is how we can implement by standard 13-centimeter hedgehog highways into gravel boards and fencing panels that people buy online or in store through the Jewson Builders Merchants catalogue. I'm pleased to say that this launched in the second quarter of 2024, actually. So we saw lots of hedgehog-friendly fencing being stocked across the Jewson branches. And it was a great development in that I was able to work with them and work with home builders at the same time who were looking to meet biodiversity net gain requirements in the legislation that came in 2024, and also looking for new ways to create habitat corridors in housing developments. So those sort of hedgehog friendly products are available on the Jewson catalogue. And it's been an ongoing partnership with Jewson, who have also supported our Hedgehog Rescue Centre with corporate sponsorship as well. So we've had a great partnership there, and it's given me a chance to connect to different individuals and organisations in the industry and hopefully make a really good impact on developments across the country, as well as people doing DIY and changing out their fencing panels. As I mentioned, I lived in the Wye Valley, so being involved in that area for a long time, I was partnered with the National Landscape, formerly the Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty there, to work with them on hedgehogs as a priority species. So they were brilliant in terms of technical support and funding as well for some of our projects, like the First Response Unit, which I'll talk to you about on the next slide. And I've worked with a whole host of other organizations and local authorities. So all of these logos of companies and organizations you see here have got HedgehogAware stickers on their machinery, for example, that they use. So really good breakthroughs and continuing to network as much as we can to get those stickers out and about. I've also been interviewed on national media, such as The One Show and Sky News and the radio. So it's been a great opportunity, lots of fun, obviously, to do that. But crucially, getting out the word about hedgehogs, what we can do to help them, and then in turn, helping wider biodiversity as well as part of my campaign. So it's been a really rewarding thing to do. I mentioned the volunteer hedgehog first response unit very briefly there. This was something that the National Landscape supported in the Wye Valley. And what it is if you live in the Wye Valley or in that area, you can call a dedicated phone number, and it acts as a voicemail system. So any time of the day, you can leave a voicemail when we have a volunteer available. Someone will get back to you. So if you found a hedgehog that's out in the day, it's injured, it's showing any signs of needing extra help or support, call the number. One of our volunteers can do sort of a triage of the situation, assess whether it needs rescuing or whether it doesn't require that extra support, and then transport and find a local space in a rescue centre for you. Since opening in 2024, we've had over 200 calls on the hotline, especially during those busier periods of summer and the run up to autumn juvenile period, as I mentioned. And that's led to over 160 rescues and direct interventions for hedgehogs in the area. So making a really big impact there. And then the Prickly Patch is the Wild Hedgehog Rehabilitation Centre. It's a Clwyd Pigog in Welsh. And we're delighted to say that thanks to funding through the Sustainable Development Fund, which is Welsh Government and Wye Valley National Landscape Initiative, combined with that corporate sponsorship from Stark and Jewson, we are able to open our centre with a formal opening launch in May. So not long to go now, and we'll be starting with the capacity to rehabilitate hedgehogs in the area, because traditionally the area around Monmouth and the Wye Valley hasn't had that many rescue centres compared to other areas of the country in Wales. So we're really keen to make sure that we do what we can to support a healthy hedgehog population to survive and thrive in the region. So do keep an eye out on our Facebook page for that, and on my website if you're interested for updates or volunteering if you're in the area. Something which Ant was talking about was the theme of responsible innovation running throughout this series of webinars with different speakers that the ALP Synergy put together. So really, I'll go through this slide quickly because we covered most of them, but I think these are the three key bits of responsible innovation that we've done in terms of working with the industry and different businesses on this. So firstly is the sticker campaign. It was a really seemed like a really simple thing to do to remind people to check, but actually it had a great impact. People weren't thinking about hedgehogs and wildlife before, and once we had persuaded one manufacturer to come on board, it was easier for others to have that snowball effect as well. So definitely something I'd suggest if you're interested in or other companies or organizations that would be interested in stickers, we can definitely support with spreading these further. The industry partnerships, looking at more sustainable products and how these sort of products like the fencing panels and the bioscape units, which have hedgehog habitat built in, can really help developers to build strong portfolio that they're actually taking active interventions for the environment in new housing developments, and they're building responsibly in the sense that they're hopefully generating a biodiversity net gain and considering about a species that may be in decline in their area. And then finally, the volunteering of the first response unit. I often thought of this as a concept and a model which could potentially be rolled out to other areas like AONBs, national landscapes, or just different regions of the country where we've got volunteers willing to help. There's some funding available, and there's rescue centres nearby. It's about kind of joining together the dots and seeing what we can do to best directly intervene and support our hedgehog population, particularly those hogs that are in need of that extra support if they're poorly or injured, for example. Hedgehog research is another kind of theme on this. What's really interesting is hedgehogs live closely to humans. We live very closely to our hedgehogs, which should mean there's a lot of research opportunities, but actually there's a broad scale disconnect between the ability to evaluate the status of the hedgehog as a species in the UK, and their monitoring efforts and our sort of love for them as a species. So it's a really challenging situation where we find ourselves trying to catch up and improve the range of data and research available that's been done on hedgehogs across the country. One of the ways that Hedgehog Street, the national charity, have tried to approach this is through the Big Hedgehog Map, which has been running for quite a few years now. And I've taken a screenshot of it in the Monmouthshire and just across the bridge area. You can see there's a real hub in Caldicot and Chepstow area. Obviously, this has been aided by a lot of conservation work and a lot of my awareness work as well, people logging their sightings. But you can use this. It's a free tool available online if you search bighedgehogmap.org and see what your area is like in terms of its abundance of hedgehog population, and hopefully make a real difference to contributing to that research if you're able to log a sighting of a hedgehog in your area. So coming to a close and conscious of time, what can you do to help? Really, there's a few simple takeaways from today's presentation. I'm sure there's lots we've covered about hedgehogs and what you can do, but really leaving a patch of your garden to grow wild is really important for hedgehogs and other biodiversity as well. So as part of that, try not to tidy leaves away. If you wanted to go the extra mile, you can create a small log pile. It'll be a great source of invertebrates. It'll attract the invertebrates and beetles, which will in turn be an excellent food source for hedgehogs. Ensure that you've got ramps, exit points on your ponds. We mentioned about hedgehogs maybe going for a dip. And finally, keep netting at least a foot off the ground or a place with thicker cordage, just to minimize the risk of entanglement. You can also become a Hedgehog Champion. It's free, it's fun, and there's lots of resources you get to spread the word like I've been doing. If you see a hedgehog out in the day, the usual rule is that it's normally not okay. So you can take a photo of this slide if you want quickly, but basically the main takeaway here is hedgehogs out in the day, not usually okay. The exception is if it's a nesting mum, will be called moving with purpose. So it'll be sticking very closely to the sides, clearly have leaves and twigs in its mouth, for example, looking to build a nest. So you don't need to intervene in that instance, but in all other instances, particularly if the hedgehog is looking lethargic, scoop it up, put it in a high-sided box so it can't escape with a lightly coloured towel so you can see if the hedgehog, there's a poo or anything there. Offer it a shallow dish of water, but no food at this stage, and add a gentle heat source underneath the towel or something like that. And call your nearest hedgehog rescue centre for help, or if you're in the Monmouth and Wye Valley area, the first response unit as well will obviously come and happily respond to your call. So a great direct intervention there. In your own garden, of course, you can also provide for hedgehogs by making a hedgehog house or buying one online. As I mentioned, I can provide you with information afterwards if you're interested. Hedgehogs don't usually like to sleep where they eat and eat where they sleep, if that makes sense. That's the only factor to bear in mind. So just think about that in terms of if you're making a feeding station, make sure that's for food and water only, and sleeping house is going to be lined with sort of dust-free hay and newspaper is ideal for hedgehogs. that brings us to the end of the presentation with a little bit of time left for questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. I hope you found that interesting. My website is hedgehogaware.org.uk for those of you who want to find out more and follow sort of updates about what I'm doing. You can also go to Hedgehog Street, which has got the big hedgehog map, and that looks a bit like that, when you can go in and zoom and explore your local area. But do keep an eye on my website and on our Facebook page as well at the Monmouth Hedgehog FRU for updates in relation to our rescue centre. But thank you so much for listening. I hope you found that interesting and learnt a fair amount about hedgehogs, a bit of a whistle-stop tour, really, as well as some of my campaign work. But I'll happily take some questions. So